of all, just tell me a little bit about yourself, John.
So my name's John Ballenger, and I'm a business owner, a veteran, a father, and I would call myself, most people that know me would call me a patriot and a statesman because I care about the country and the condition we are leaving the country in. So I own a few companies, primarily companies that most people don't like to deal with. So dealing with a lot of insurance, a lot of law, a lot of things to do with oil and banking and things like that. So very complicated things to the general public, but things that my mind is able to grasp and adapt to and then explain in what I call, and I've been saying this for years, a fourth grade level. So let me learn all these complicated things and then communicate them at a fourth grade level so that the general population can understand them. Father of three, 27, 21, and now I have a 6-year-old daughter that was a late in life surprise. But I realize now that she was purposely put here to rattle me and say, all right, what are you doing to leave the generation coming up behind you a place that's at least as good as you got it when you were born? And that kind of rattled me to say, you know what am I doing? So really got involved with doing things with veterans and going to schools and working with kids and things like that, because that's the future of America.
So where were you when you heard about the plane hitting the tower, and how did you find out about it?
I was actually sitting in a jury box downtown on a wrongful death lawsuit between a doctor and a patient, and I was the jury foreman at the time, and it was 9:03. I believe I was sitting in that jury box, and we were getting ready to open up our third week in this litigation when the bailiff come in, and they basically locked the courthouse down, and they took us into the jury room, and we didn't know what was going on. Had no idea what was going on until the judge came in and gave us that. So they'd locked it down, and I got home that night. I believe it was about 11 o'clock that night. They finally unlocked the federal building and let us all out. But that's where I was at. I was in a jury box.
So when you found out, had just one tower been hit, or had both been hit at that point?
One had been hit at that point, and they came back in and told us about another one. And so
you guys didn't get to watch TV?
No.
Interesting. Okay.
No, had no idea what, other than what we were being communicated to. We just knew that there was a terrorist attack they assumed was going on, but there were still a lot of unknowns about what was going on. And so here you're in this room with these other people, and you really don't know what's going on other than that you're locked down.
Yeah, you couldn't really Google stuff
No,
back then. So.
no.
Wow, that's scary. Okay. So that's what I was going to ask. How did you react, and how did the people around you react to what was going on? You had a very unique situation there. So tell me what you were thinking as they come in each time.
Well, being a veteran, the first thing you start thinking is you start processing. All right, what's the plan? I mean, you're as a veteran, you're just wired to what's the plan, because if you don't have a plan, you can't execute anything. So I started thinking, all right, what would be going on if the federal building shut down? That's bad. So that means is there something going on out here, or is it Chattanooga? Because you don't know. And so my mind started working on, all right, what's the plan? And everybody else is kind of just lackadaisical about it. I was the only veteran on the jury box. So my reaction versus their reaction, theirs was more like, oh man, what are we going to do? When are we going to eat? And mine was, what are we going to do? What's the plan? Because what if something happens here? And so that was my first reaction is, all right, what's the plan?
So when they came in and they told you that the first tower had been hit, what was your immediate thought? I mean, did you think it was a terrorist attack then, or did you think it was a fluke? Or
no, I mean, if you lock a federal building down, something bad's wrong. I mean, they've gotten orders to. I mean, you got to think about what has to happen for the juries and all the courthouse. And we had been told that the airport system was shut down, and so you're processing that thing, and this is bad. This is a nationwide issue that we're being faced with. And then my reaction went to, if it's that bad, I'm going to be called active duty. That was the second reaction, because at the time I was actually out of the National Guard. I had gone in active duty. I'd spent time in the Guard, and my business had taken me to where I'd been put on what was called an inactive status. But because of what I did in the military, I knew that I could be activated at any time, and I did. I was activated pretty soon after that to go back on active duty. So that was my second reaction. I'm probably call back up.
I want you to tell me a little bit about that here in a minute. So don't let me forget that because I don't have that down. So I'm assuming you were told, first tower's hit, second tower's hit. Once the second tower had been hit, did you think that might have, because there was, previous terrorist attacks on the Trade Center building.
Mm-hmm.
Did you think that was it? I mean, were you expecting there to be more attacks? Or?
Well, if you think, being in aviation, my first response was, how did they get those aircraft? And if they've flown 2 into those towers, what else have they gotten? I mean, but it's odd to be sitting in a room with no access to communications or anything and have to process what's going on, and you're getting blips. And so there's a lot of assumptions, which are not good, but how do you try to figure out what to do and what the reaction would be when you've not seen anything? And I heard, that next day is everybody says they knew where they were when Kennedy was shot. And it was kind of it was an embedded moment in my mind as I sat there in that jury box and they came in and the judge said, hey, we're going to have to escort you into the jury room, and there's been a terrorist attack that they assume has happened. And when she said they flew a plane into the tower, I was like, because I know what kind of coordination that takes.
Yeah. What about when the Pentagon got hit?
So we didn't even know that. All we knew at the time that the Twin Towers got hit. I didn't find that out until I got home that night and found out about Flight 93 and the Pentagon, and I'm thinking, that you find out how bad this happened, but how well coordinated this is.
Yeah, right. So when you, she wants to come be on camera. So when you got home and found out about Flight 93 and the Pentagon, what were you thinking then?
Pissed off, honestly.
That's okay.
Yeah, pissed off. First, it's hard to describe in the mind of a veteran to someone that's a non-veteran, but our mindset is we run to battle. You're trained to run to disasters and battles and carnage and blood and death, which is it's hard to explain that to somebody that's not wired that way. And I've always thought that veterans were wired, for the most part, I would say 95% are wired to do what they do, because most people would not run to death and destruction. Firemen are wired that way. Policemen are wired that way. But you're only talking about 0.7% of Americans that are serving in the military. So less than 1% are wired to do what they do. And a percentage of those do those things for a college scholarship or something other than, but the majority of veterans do what they do because they were born to do that. Mm-hmm. I realized going through basic training, this is what I'm wired to do. And your first reaction is, how did the system fail? Because the system had to fail for that kind of coordination to happen. And so now you're kind of like, what happened? Because when in aviation, and I tell the story where when I went into aviation, there was a Webster's dictionary sitting out on the front stand, and here's an aircraft engine, here's a bowl of ice, and here's a Webster's dictionary. And I walk in, and the instructor tells us to turn to the word mistake in the dictionary and tear it out and eat it. Because from this day forward, you do not make mistakes. And the intent was, if you are going to work on aircraft, you can't make mistakes, because when you do, people die. And that set a tone, and that was 9-month school. So every day you're hearing, don't make mistakes, don't make mistakes, don't make mistakes. Pretty soon it gets in your head, I keep making mistakes. And so when you hear that people that are part of your organization have made mistakes, it's infuriating.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, I was going to ask you if you remembered how the government responded, like President Bush and stuff. I know you didn't get to watch TV, but when you got home that night, I'm sure were you watching the news
I did.
and saw maybe some of the stuff that was happening throughout the day. I think they were kind of playing it over and over. Did you happen to see anything that any address from President Bush?
The only thing I remember was he was belittled because he was reading a book to children in Florida. And I'm gonna be honest, if I had been in the same seat he had been, and that had been communicated to me, I would have reacted the exact same way. Because there's kids there, and he's reading a book, and let me get done with my book, and let me go back to doing what I need to do.
Okay. All right. How has 9/11 affected your life on a personal level?
Well, I remember for about 3 to 6 months, flags were flying all over the place. And then I remember when they stopped being flown. And I didn't understand that. How is our memory? And our memory is shorter now than it was then. How does something happen this significant? I mean, Pearl Harbor happened, and veterans that I was in the military with or knew that had been in the military during that time frame never forgot that. They flew their flags. They understood the sacrifice that the military made. They understood what the country and patriotism, and it disturbs me to this day that we are so unpatriotic and so divisive as a country that we don't let something that significant that happen on our soil. It becomes, maybe it's part of the history books, and maybe kids are taught about it 20 years from now, but it seems almost insignificant for the most part. You know, we have, on that day, there will be people that read the names off, but it's almost like, yeah, next. That's just, I'm just being honest about the way I feel.
I agree. I should have done all my classes that day, and that's all we do. But all right, I'm going to ask you a few questions. We're almost done, by the way, and don't let me forget to ask you about getting called back on active duty there. So, what are your thoughts? You know, airport security's changed a lot since 9/11. So, what are your thoughts on that? I'm thinking about things like the TSA, you know, going through the body scanning machines, the shampoo bottle sizes, things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so we're still in reactive mode instead of proactive mode. And recently, I think it was this week, it was put out that you couldn't have tablets and things larger than cell phones on international flights because of what chatter. That's the new word, the new buzzword is chatter. There's some chatter. And I think our enemy, all they have to do is create chatter. And we'll close tunnels down, we'll close bridges down, we'll do all these things that cost a lot of money over chatter. And we're still operating in a very reactive position. And human intelligence used to be one of the fastest ways to get information. And we've gone to more of a digital intelligence. So we're tracking social media and we're tracking Twitter and things like emails, but there's no substitute for human intelligence. Being on the ground, seeing something, because somebody on the other side of the fence that is an enemy is going to slip up. And if they're shrewd enough to be able to pull off what they did at 9/11 and to pull off what I think they did with the Malaysia flight, they're shrewd enough to do things that we don't even have any idea because we're so transfixed on, let's look at it digitally instead of from human intelligence. And I think we really fail on human intelligence now.
Well, that kind of leads into the next question, the NSA, which was created because of 9/11. How do you feel about the NSA? And I guess what I'm trying to get at here, are you okay with giving up some of your privacy rights to keep the country?
Well, I think there's a balance to that. See, we live in such a divisive society that now we've got anything that we do, and I know, I think it was Ben Franklin that said it, but a man, or Thomas Jefferson, a man that, gives up his rights because of something happening in his life, the freedom, or sacrifices freedom, deserves neither one. In my mind, can we create a system of checks and balances, standards with which we operate on, that still upholds the Constitution, but is also looking at what potentially could harm the country? And if you look at the way the government is set up now, it's so cumbersome that and I remember, because it was pounding on our head, the government agencies didn't talk to each other. That's why 9/11 happened. And how can a country that has all these different entities inside of it not communicate with one another? How is that standard acceptable? And so I believe that there should be human intelligence, and there should be, the term that's used in the military is snooping and pooping. That's what there should be snoopers and poopers out there, and we should know who they are. And that's not somebody, and that's somebody that's patriotic enough to say, you know what, I've been called to do this. I'm not going to abuse that power, but my job is to, if I see something, hear something, then I need to say something, and then we need to investigate. And the people, I think I may even share this with the class, if the special operators in America, which is your Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Special Forces, paramilitary rescue, if those men can do what they do every day and go home to their wife and kids and pat them and love them and hug on them and get up and go to work and do the same thing, they'll fly to another country, complete a mission, fly back, and they're back home in 4 or 5 days, and nobody knows what happened. And you know what? They don't talk about it. If they can do that, why can't we take that same process from the military into the government side of it and say, now here's our standard? Because it works over here. But one of the most, I guess everybody has questions about why, and mine is, why do we not use the standards that are established in the military that work on the civilian side? Because when we try to, and I've tried to, when I go into companies and I ask the question, what is your standard for operating? And they're like, my what? Well, how you operate, the standards with which you do what you do every day. Whether you do it to an employee, with your customers, and whatever it is, what's your standard, how you operate? And they don't have that. And it just really perplexes me that we don't take standards and implement them like we do in the military. And then everybody wants to know, why is the government and the country and business, why is it so malfunctioned? Well, what's the standard?
So are you okay with going through a body scanner at the airport? Or with, having to take the little travel size shampoos? Are you okay with, I know the government's not watching your emails and stuff, but let's say they were. Are you okay with that so that we can be safe?
So I don't have any issue with a body scanner. I don't have an issue with, don't take anything larger than this size. Is that making me uncomfortable by doing that? No. My reaction when they did that and said it can't be larger than this, and I said, well, what if that was the only size that we could ever have, whether it was in the home or, but here again, in the military, you do a whole lot with very little. So when somebody says you can only have that much, okay, that's what you go with. That didn't impact me. It doesn't now. If somebody wants to watch my emails, is it the government, or could a hacker do it? There's hackers every day that all they do is get out of bed just to see what they can hack. That's their game. And I don't put anything in my emails. I guess it's one of those, if you've got something to hide, what's your standard? And we all have a closet that we don't want anybody to see in. Everybody has a closet. But, is it the safety and security of America? Is that foremost? Or is your closet the most important thing?
Should we be able to have guns on planes?
This question was proposed to me after the 5 the soldiers and Marines were, sailors and Marines were killed here in Chattanooga. And it was just, I mean, it was a message that went out. Why are all military people on military installations of any type not armed with a live weapon? And I remember being called on talk radio and asked that question, and I said they should not. And everybody, I was piled on, but my reasoning is that most friendly fire or accidental shootings in the police department or the military happen because of somebody's emotional instability to react to a situation. There's a maturity that happens to you as you get older about how to handle adverse situations. And so my comment is if anybody is a E5 and above or an O3 and above, absolutely give them a weapon. But if they're fresh out of boot camp and they've not been put in a hostile situation and you're going to give them a live weapon and they don't know how to react to that, then they're putting their fellow soldiers in danger because they may end up killing them and not the person that's attacking them.
Yeah. Okay, I've got three more questions here. So how did you feel about the incidents in Iraq and Afghanistan?
That's a touchy subject. So I got in this conversation about 2 weeks ago with an attorney in Chattanooga. And my comment to him, because I get asked that question quite often, my comment to him was that I would much rather have gone through Afghanistan and Iraq from a military, I'm talking about it as a total military, because our men and women now know what the enemy smells like, feels like, thinks like, acts like. And if they do come to America, which we're not used to, we're not used to war like other countries are used to war every day. We're not used to that. But if they come, had we not known how they operate, it puts us in a jeopardized position. I mean, and I hate to say that, but do you want your military trained to fight the enemy? Or do you want them to be surprised and not have any idea what they smell like, feel like, think like? So, has it been tough? Yeah. But are we better prepared for it if they do come to our soil now? Yeah. Because we weren't. We didn't. I remember the big issue when it happened is aircraft having sand, and most pilots are trained to land in an environment where there's not sand wash coming up, and so when you get to 100 feet above ground, that blade's turning and sand's just beating up you can't see anything. And that was a big issue, and it tore the engines up in the aircraft because of sand getting them. There was just so many things that we don't think about, and so we had to go through a lot of things to really rethink how we dealt with that type of enemy, because everything at that point had been Vietnam era training. So it was jungles, it was streams, it was mountains, it was valleys. We used land terrain to fly by when you go to the sand. What kind of land terrains do you have? You don't have rivers, streams, valleys, hilltops, things like that. You've got sand.
That kind of goes into my next two questions. Last two questions. How do you feel about the proposed travel bans going on right now that kind of target those Middle Eastern countries? You think that's a good idea for our safety, or is it discriminatory? Or
so this to me is a very simple answer. We make things way more complicated than they should. It's about a system of checks and balances. And it's a standard. And if we have a standard, like other countries have a standard, to get in this country, you must do this. Hence a passport. Okay? You must apply for the passport. You've got to do all these things and prove who you are, birth certificate. So why wouldn't we set that same standard here and say, this is how you come into America? I mean, that's not that difficult. We shouldn't have this free-flowing, and here again, immigrants have help build America. I'm not saying anything about the immigrant population and what's built America. But if we don't have a standard on how you enter and exit America, we're going to get what we've got. And there's no doubt in my mind, not being a conspiracy theorist, there's no doubt in my mind there are cells in America of people that have come here and are just waiting to be triggered to respond to it.
Do you think immigrants from places like Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Iran, do you think they should go through a harder process than everybody else?
If we
Say
are
somebody coming from Canada?
sure, let me rethink. No, we should have a standard, and that should be the standard.
Okay. All right, my last question, and then don't let me forget about the active duty, but my last question, do you think America is safer now than it was before September 11th,
No.
2011?
No, because we're still trying to figure out what to do. And I'm saying that from been involved in politics a lot as a person, military, business, traveling America like I do. Do I feel like we are safer? No, I feel like we are just fortunate right now.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about you getting called back to active duty.
That phone call happened, I can't remember the actual date, but the phone call happened and said, either you find you a unit or we're going to find you a unit. And that's usually how it goes when they've got to do what's called plus up the military because of an act of war. You got to think the government looks at me as an actual tool because I've been trained, they've had money spent on me, and my job at the time, the job that they trained me to do was I was a maintenance person for helicopters. And so they had heavily invested in my training, and they said, we're going to have a lot of issues with helicopters and maintenance issues, and we need you to find you a unit or we'll find you a unit. So I just got on the phone and started calling units and asking if they needed somebody with my expertise to join their unit. And I found one, actually, fortunately, in Alcoa, Tennessee. And drove up there and met with the unit commander and established the protocol that I need to rejoin what the time is the National Guard. And then, it wasn't, maybe 2 weeks later, that unit was mobilized to active duty. But the opposite would have been they would just put me with whoever, whenever, and I would have gone. At least I had some control of knowing who I was with and what I would be doing and where I would be going. And so that happened, and we were deployed from, I want to say it was 03 to sometime in 04, 16, 17 months, something like that.
Or two.
Well, the fortunate thing with all those crusty guys that were in aviation is we got to pull medevac, what was called, there's CONUS and OCONUS, I don't know if you know that term, but CONUS is Continental United States deployment, OCONUS is outside Continental United States. And so we mobilized to go OCONUS, and we figured we were going to Afghanistan.